County Democratic Party website, so you can share the conversation with all of your friends after the fact. And on behalf of the Taos County Democratic Party, I want to welcome everybody. The party is the host of this event tonight, and I'm here with my vice chair of the county party hat on. Happy to be here. Happy to have a couple of other candidates slash electeds with us. Darlene V. Hill, my fellow, although that's not the word we should be using in a conversation like this, my colleague commissioner-elect is here with us. And I'm scrolling the names and I don't see other electeds, except for our moderator, Kristina Ortez. So Kristina, if you want to just take a moment and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristina Ortez. I am the Democratic candidate for New Mexico House State Representative for District 42, which is here in Taos County. I'm so thrilled to be chatting with all of you tonight and to welcome Dr. Burk. I'm really excited to talk with you, Dr. Burk, about all the issues that affect all of us, but especially women, and what we need to do to activate ourselves as we have in this last election. So thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you, Kristina. And hopefully everybody who was patiently waiting a week for this to happen had a chance to order Dr. Burk's book from the Taos County website, taosvotesblue.com. Thank you, Darlene. All right. We are very fortunate to have Dr. Martha Burk with us tonight. She has a pretty incredible history of activism around women's issues. She is a political psychologist. She is the money editor at Ms. Magazine. She is a sought-after expert and consultant on the issue of pay equity. She's done a whole lot. And what I've found over the last couple of weeks is she's also just a real joy and fun to talk to. So Dr. Burk, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here. It really is.
Thank you.
And I am particularly pleased with all the female electeds because as we were talking before we started here, when women finally got the vote, one of the big objections from the men was that women were going to take over the world. So girls, maybe it could happen 100 years later.
Well, thank you very much for being here. And I wanted to start with a question that gets kind of to the core of equality in this country. In your book, you mentioned that women in the US have far fewer constitutional rights than women in many other countries, whether you want to call them like advanced or wealthy or not. We lag behind, right? And so what it made me think about is that going back to the suffragist movement through Phyllis Schlafly and beyond, there's been this trend of more conservative women saying, we don't need to be singled out, like we're good, like we're equal enough. And I'd love to just start us off tonight hearing you talk about the importance of ratifying the ERA.
Okay, it is very important, and you're correct. We lag behind all of the developed world, and many countries that we would consider coming up. Most of them have either a constitutional provision or something very strong to guarantee equal rights for women. The exceptions are the United States and Papua New Guinea, and a few outliers out there, but the United States among developed countries is really the rogue country. And you mentioned the fight for suffrage and also the backlash against the ERA in the 1970s. The ERA was up for ratification, and I just put a plug in for a couple of shows that people may want to watch. Mrs. America on FX is about Phyllis Schlafly and how they stopped the ERA, and it's a very good representation of the women that were part of that fight. I was not. At that time, I was a stay-at-home mom with 2 little kids. That pretty well radicalized me because I was trying to go to graduate school, no child care, married to a workaholic guy, And you know, you get to thinking, why are we in this space? But anyway, it was going to be 38 states. Schlafly stopped the ERA momentum, and that was about 72, 73. She did it by exactly what these women are saying now. We don't need to be singled out. We like being protected, all of this sort of thing. And some of them had religious objections, you know, God didn't intend for women to be equal and so forth. So the ERA drive was stopped short of 38 states that were needed to ratify. And it's been an ongoing struggle. This past year, Virginia, once they got a Democratic majorities in both the House and Virginia Senate, they were the last state to ratify. So 38 states have ratified it. It is still not the law of the land or constitutionally enshrined because it's being contested in court. Big surprise. 3 states, I believe it's 3, possibly 4, but I think it's 3 states rescinded their ratification, they said. But the little snag there is that there is no constitutional provision for rescinding a ratification of any amendment. Never mind that they say they did. They can't legally do it, but it is being contested. The other thing is that the Equal Rights Amendment had a time limit of 7 years for ratification, but it's not in the amendment. It's in the preamble. And so it's not actually part of the amendment. And the reason, I mean, the other argument you hear is, oh, we've already got equal rights. We don't need any more rights. We can now get in law school and medical school. Girls can play sports in school, all these things that we didn't used to be able to do. But there's one big problem. Every right that women in the United States have is statutory, meaning a law can be overturned at any time. The Equal Pay Act could be overturned by a hostile Congress and signed by a hostile chief executive. Not that we know what that would be like. And, Title IX, where women can now get in programs that they couldn't used to get into in universities and colleges. They can play sports in school. Girls can actually have PE classes. We couldn't do that when I was a kid because girls didn't play sports. And all of the laws of pregnancy discrimination, for example, you could be fired for being pregnant. You could be fired for being female, for that matter. And so all of those are laws that if we just get a hostile enough Congress, we could lose. The other thing is they are systematically weakened. Through one court case here makes a little exception on something, another one there, and over the years, they get weakened. If we had the bedrock constitutional amendment, that could not happen. So that's really the bottom line on the ERA. My hope is that in the next couple of years, we'll get all this challenge settled and it'll be a big celebration. We always used to say in our lifetime.
Yeah.
And so that's what we hope.
So it's time. It's time. You mentioned in your answer, and thank you, getting into medical school, getting into law school, getting into school and playing sports at all, which makes me want to ask you about our next bit of the equality topic, which is affirmative action. Our country right now is at a moment of examining systemic racism. At least I really deeply hope that that's the work that we have started and are committing to. You list in your book some really fascinating statistics around the impact of affirmative action on addressing systemic racism and systemic misogyny. And could you share with us some of your insights around the effect of affirmative action programs?
I can, and I think it would be helpful to some of our audience to just talk about what actually it is. By the way, before we leave the ERA completely, I do want to say that New Mexico has a state ERA. So we'll come back to that when we talk about pay equity a little bit. But affirmative action came out of Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. The Civil Rights Act outlawed discrimination on the basis of race or religion, and sex was added later, a couple of years later. Lyndon Johnson was president. He decided that it was good to have the Civil Rights Act, absolutely, but it wasn't enough. So he signed an executive order creating affirmative action for that applied to any corporation that got public money, or any, for that matter, nonprofit that got public money. And what it said was, you must strive for a workforce that reflects the available qualified pool of applicants, regardless of race or sex. So the example I always use is for low skill or the lowest skilled jobs. Technically, everybody that applies qualifies because they're unskilled labor. Then if you get up, let's say, to engineering, if women or people of color are, let's say, 20% of the engineering graduates in a given area, you would expect 20% new hires in the engineering workforce, and in a few years, 20% in the management of those companies. But affirmative action does not apply to any entity that doesn't get federal money. Now, many companies have put in affirmative action practices, and some of them are very good at it, but they're doing it because they think that it's good for society and probably good for their bottom line, but they don't have to. Anyway, it has made a tremendous difference for women and people of color in professional programs, in universities, because it applies to darn near every university. They usually, even if they're private, they get some federal money. It has made a tremendous difference in federal employment, certainly, and employment in larger companies. We still see what amounts to a systemic discrimination in many smaller companies, many mom and pops. There might be 5 people and they're all white except maybe someone in the kitchen washing dishes who's a person of color. So those things are still out there. They still need to be addressed, but without it, we would be back to the 1960s, where racial discrimination and sex discrimination were blatant. They were enshrined in the society and in people's minds. And so it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing to remind, if you know anybody in a position to be a decision maker about that, it's a good thing to bring it up.
Thanks so much for that answer, Dr. Burk. You know, I spent a lot of time reading this book. I spent a lot of time on the chapter about childcare. I am the mother of 2 young girls, 6 and 9. So it's something that I really, really care about. And I was astonished to learn that from your book, I learned that Congress has twice passed federal child care legislation, and 2 times that legislation was vetoed by presidents. There's no question in my mind that right now we're in a crisis. Childcare is an issue in this country. It's very expensive, even in our community in Taos. And I think it's going to be even more of an issue with this pandemic, with us not going back to schools, being able to send our children back to school in the way that we're accustomed. So what advice do you have? What questions should we be asking of current candidates like myself and current elected officials to address this issue?
Well, thank you. That was a good introduction to the problem. And as I said when I first came on, I think lack of childcare, many people call me a radical. That's good. I'm happy to take the label because I was doing what you're doing now. And that's been 40 years ago. And nothing has changed. I was a stay-at-home mom trying to go to school, trying to work, to pay for my tuition. I was married, but it didn't matter because my husband was a workaholic and we needed the income from that too. And it was just one heck of a balancing act. And I want to point out that the two presidents that vetoed child care bills were Nixon. He called it the Sovietization of American children, and Gerald Ford, who we thought of as a moderate Republican, but he vetoed a child care bill. We haven't had one since, and that's the 1970s. And it's, again, we're not number one. We are number 800 and something probably in the world. The European countries, by and large, have, and the Soviet Union for that matter, they have some kind of organized, publicly sponsored child care. We don't even have pre-kindergarten. So it's up to families. COVID is huge on this. Think about it. And it trickles down, so to speak. It's not just a problem who's going to watch the kids. It's family income. Think about, so you got a two-parent family. Somebody's got to stay home. Who's that going to be? The person that makes the least money because it hurts the family less financially. Who is that? Usually the woman. So we do have a crisis. We've had a crisis that has been sort of manageable because, as you point out, it's a huge expense. On the average, it's 25% of the two-family income for child care for two kids. And if you have an infant, it's even more. So it is a crisis. There is a bill on the Hill right now, and I'm going to need to look at my notes. I want to make sure I get this exactly right. It's called the Child Care is Essential Act, and it's Rosa DeLauro and Patty Murray. It's their bill in the House, and it will give grant funding to child care centers to try to stabilize child care during COVID and keep some of these child care centers open. It can be used for personnel pay, facilities, revamping the facility to make it more COVID-proof, so to speak. It hasn't cleared a committee even yet, much less gotten to our wonderful child-centered Senate. But for the audience, it's called Child Care is Essential. I think that all of our representatives would be on the bill, but here's something I found, and as good as our folks are in New Mexico, they have a lot to keep up with, and so does their staff. So it is not in the realm, it's in the realm of possibility. They may not know about this bill. So they'll be doing town halls and so forth, some of them virtual, but be sure and ask. And I've had this happen when they've said, or they know about the bill and they think they're on the bill, but their staff hadn't quite gotten around to getting them signed on. And I had this with Ben Ray a while back. I called the office and I said, this is Martha Burk, and I've forgotten what the bill was. And I know Ben Ray would be on this. And the person who answered the phone said, he's not on there. And I said, not yet. And it was just a staffing issue, you know, it kind of fell through the cracks. So that's what I would say. Long term, we have got to have a strong president. Even a Democrat that's weak won't do it. I don't know why child care is controversial, but it is. So we got to have strong majorities in both houses and a president that wouldn't veto a bill.
Oh, I get pretty upset just thinking about how our lives could be a little bit easier if we had this support. And one of the points that you make in your book is that if there were more women in the House and the Senate who, you know, who had experienced this, then things would be different. That's the whole point of the book, is that
Yeah,
we need to elect
absolutely.
women who understand this.
And another point of the book I want to make with our bow to George here is keep this in your head. Women can control any election in the United States. We are the majority of the population. We are the majority of registered voters, and we're the majority that actually shows up at the polls. And so what I say is women, along with the men, George, that care about women's progress, absolutely can control any election. We just got to get out there and do it. And we are the majority of progressives in this country. So, you know, Schlafly and company notwithstanding, we were on affirmative action a while ago. Women are very strong supporters of affirmative action for racial minorities as well as their own gender. And the same is true of many other issues. Women divide along ideological lines of progress, much more so than men.
Do you hear that, George?
Sure. Oh,
George, I'm counting on you to vote with us. I think you will. And many men of goodwill will. But we have to, you know, a lot of people, not just men, a lot of women are just unaware. And they think we're number one. And they're real surprised when you say, you know, we're the only industrialized country on earth that doesn't have some kind of organized, subsidized child care. And they go, what?
It's rather embarrassing. It really is. So my next question is around family planning. The Supreme Court just ruled on women's reproductive health. And one thing I didn't know is about the history, and I learned this from your book, the history of the Comstock Law and its role in this country's debate about women's reproductive health. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I can. It was very interesting. Back in the early 1800s, one of the rubber companies still in business, maybe Vulcan, I don't know, one of them. Anyway, they invented what amounted to a substance that condoms could be made out of. And so women and a lot of men, I'm sure, were just very happy about this. And this guy, Anthony Comstock, came along, and they had condoms for several years. They didn't call them that; they called them different things, but they had them. And he got all exercised about this. He thought that contraception was sinful. It was going to lead to women, of course, being immoral. And he decided to try to get it outlawed. And he was pretty successful. He got it outlawed in several states on the basis that it was immoral. He tried to make it absolutely illegal, but he didn't get too far on that. He got it in several states, but he never got a federal law. And those laws were in effect for quite a while, but women still got birth control, because the providers would advertise in these broadsheet magazines, and they'd call them something like Married Women's Friends, or some device, some verbal device like that. So women got what they needed for the most part. But these laws were on the books for almost 100 years. And one by one, the states changed their mind. A big push was in 1917, when the U.S. went to World War I. The soldiers were getting BD like crazy. And so they decided, well, maybe we better make condoms something that are readily available. And of course that helped women. But the last law did not leave the U.S. state law against contraception until the 60s, and that was the state of Connecticut. So this kind of control of women has been going on forever, and to see that was from 1839 to the 1960s. So it didn't take quite as long as it did to get the vote, but it took a long time. And the anti-abortion folks now have in many cases tried to make the case that even birth control is murder. I mean, it is far-fetched as it sounds. And so I don't think the fight is over at all. And I think lack of contraception, of course, is one of the ways that women are controlled.
Wow, thank you for that background, Dr. Burk. We want to just do a little heads up to our audience. I think we're going to ask 2 more questions and then turn it over to all of you to raise your hand, wave at us, unmute yourself, and ask your questions. And we'll try to wrangle and moderate that as best we can. But Dr. Burk, one of your areas of expertise is equal pay. Also very important to women and their families and their lives. And you worked with New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson on one of the first state efforts around this. I was not all that aware of that history, and I think a lot of us, even though we're New Mexicans here now, we're not necessarily aware of that, even though we are aware of the importance of pay equity in women's lives and their families' lives. So if you could talk about that a bit, the history and also the issue of equity and pay right now in light of our current health and economic crisis, because as we know, the majority of our essential workers are women.
Yeah, well, they are. And also the majority that are getting laid off in some industries like food service are women. And many of them don't make the same as men. Well, the pay gap overall right now is 20 cents on the dollar. And it's been stuck there for about almost 2 decades. But I do have, if I can find it, I had some stats on women of color are making much less. Hispanic women are at the bottom at 53 cents on the dollar. Native Americans are not much better off. It's important to this state, 58 cents. And African Americans at 63. So that 80% number doesn't really reflect this state very well. But what we did, I had been head of the National Council of Women's Organizations in Washington for a number of years before I came to New Mexico. And I came here when Bill Richardson was running for president. So I joined his campaign as a senior advisor for women's issues. And because as good as all candidates are, they can't know everything. And if they have somebody that's kind of pointy-headed like I am on a particular issue, it helps them you can give them the shorthand of it. So my main, I have to digress a little bit here. One of my main motivations for being on Richardson's campaign, I really had no particular illusions that he was going to prevail over Obama and Clinton, as well as several others. And I don't think he did either, but we thought that it would be a good way to sort of move the agenda. And I particularly helped write some of his speeches, and I would put stuff in that I knew if he said it in a debate, what are Obama and Clinton going to do? Are they going to say, I'm not for pay equity, or I'm not for whatever? So he was very good to work with. And after he dropped out of the election and remained governor, I proposed to him that I come on board as a senior advisor for women's issues, and that we do a first in the nation initiative on pay equity. And we did it. And here's what it is. And I want to talk about this particularly because it's still important. We crafted an initiative where if you're a company or any entity, a nonprofit even, and you want public money from the state of New Mexico, you have to tell us how you pay women and how you pay men. And it's not just, you can't just send in a little piece of paper that says, oh, we pay women equally. No, we had them collect the salary data. It went through what I call a meat grinder that I designed. I have a strong background in computer science. And so at the end of the pipe comes out for all the job categories that the feds keep up with. what do you pay women, what do you pay men, and what's the pay gap? And so we instituted that, but disfortunatamente, the clock ran out on it before we got it fully institutionalized. The companies were reporting though, because he did it by executive order. We knew we couldn't get a bill passed in a short period of time, so he just signed an executive order. It is still in force. Now, what happened to that? Well, so Susana Martinez happened to it. It's on the books, it's in force, but she ignored it. She let it completely die. And our current governor either has not had time or the motivation to pick it up herself. I spoke with her about it shortly after she was elected, like right after the inaugural. It was a short conversation. I asked her about it and if she planned to do something. And her answer was, to me, was, don't worry, it's all taken care of. And that's the last that's been said about it. Yes.
Do you think that it would make sense for one of the houses to introduce a bill to, codify it into legislation? Is that needed?
Yeah, it's really needed now. The only reason that I advised Governor Richardson not to do it is he didn't have a lot of time still in office. He was in his second term. He wasn't going to be reelected. And we knew we couldn't. I said, you may not even get something out of committee. So let's do it by executive order. I don't think the current governor would have the temerity to nullify the executive order, but neither has she done anything with it. And the whole infrastructure is there. It's really a shame. So yes, I'd be happy to work with anybody that wants to talk about that. And I do know a lot about it. I'm currently, and we were the first in the nation to do it at the state level. And I'm currently working with the mayor of Albuquerque and the council. We have a sister initiative to that, and it's the first at the city level. I consult with others around the country on it. Berkeley, California, the state of Missouri, I'm working with New Orleans, but none of them have moved as fast as we have. So it's a good thing. Our pay gaps in New Mexico are no better than nationally, and we have many female-headed households, so we really need it.
Yeah. Wonderful. I think it's a whole different Senate and House now, more women than ever before, and a lot of enlightened men as well.
Yeah, and this is something that I want to point out to the audience as well. We've done research, and it is in the book, about how often women will cross party lines in a deliberative body and vote on something that's good for women. And men don't do that as often in the legislature, so it is important.
And it's also important to remind our male allies around that, voting for what's good for women is what's good for all of our families, right?
Well, this is important. It's very important because when we first started working on the ERA and equal pay laws, 63 was the first equal pay law, men thought women were going to take their jobs or something. But now they get it. I mean, another income, if it could be up to where it ought to be, the whole family is better off. And I don't think men oppose these things at all now. I think they're supportive.
Yeah. Last year I went to visit a company that I was working for part-time, and it was the first week of April. And at about 3:30 in the afternoon, everyone looked at their clocks and stopped work, and they had pink and red beads, and they popped some non-alcoholic sparkling stuff and gave out stickers, and it was Equal Pay Day. It was Equal Pay Day, which meant that, the first week of April was the day that women finally, caught up to what men had earned the year before, white women anyway. But they celebrated it. I still, my sticker is one of my prized possessions, ironically enough. So
Well, go ahead.
No, I was just go ahead, because I was going to move us on to our last topic before our audience questions.
Okay, I'll just say really quickly that it's been, the Equal Pay Act was passed in '63, and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which sort of helped it along, '64. We're still stuck. So we need, Obama put in a regulation that any federal contractor, and I consulted with his Labor Department on this, had to report by gender and race what they paid people, had to report to the feds. One of the first things Trump did was overturn that. So we're not going to get it. Okay.
Okay.
That's
the importance of data. Let's hope that
Yeah.
we have a data-driven administration starting next year. The last thing we want to talk about tonight is important, and it's also just an amazing story that some people might be aware of, some people might not. Back in the 90s, like, you led the charge, making it unacceptable for private clubs like Augusta National, where the Masters golf tournament is held, to borrow women, made it unacceptable for them to borrow women from membership. In doing so in the South, also, wrapped up that issue with issues of racial discrimination. And it is definitely quite a story of being out there demanding social change. And you've even remarked on it, that how relieved you are that it all took place before social media. And I'd just love for you to tell the audience that story.
Well, it's an interesting story, a very, as I say, it'll be on my gravestone. It really will. But I have to tell you how it started. I was head of the National Council of Women's Organizations, and that was a coalition that collectively represented 10 million women. And we had all the big groups like NOW, Planned Parenthood, AAUW, National Council of Negro Women, the Women's part of La Raza. We had a broad coalition, and I was chair of it. And we had board meetings like all organizations, and we were picking up our stuff to leave one day. And I said, I was on a plane the other day, and I read about this golf club, and they don't let women in. And I was thinking I might write them a letter. And they all said, fine, write them a letter. We don't need a vote on that. So I wrote them a letter, very politely suggesting that they open to women. And about 3 days later, my phone rang, and it was the Associated Press. And they said, what about this letter you wrote to Augusta National? And I said, oh, no, what about this letter Augusta National wrote to you? And I said, I haven't seen a letter they wrote to me. I did get a FedEx from Georgia, but I haven't had time to open it. And it's Doug Ferguson with the Associated Press. He's the main golf writer. He said, let me read it to you. And they had just gone ballistic. And they had sent this thing to every news outlet in the country. Just how can this woman, she's trampling on our rights, and the argument. So by 6 o'clock that night, my phone rang, and it's my son in Texas. And he says, Mother, you're on the Golf Channel. And so they had our logo and our picture and all that. Well, it just exploded from there. And it drug on for a couple of years. I got, the reason I said, and I need to repeat this because it's important, I was head of Wichita, Kansas now in the 1980s, and we had a late-term abortion clinic. Some of you may remember a guy named George Tiller ran it. The clinic was bombed. He was eventually assassinated after I left there, but I was on TV there a lot, and I got a lot of death threats, but nothing like I got with Augusta. I was stalked. I had to hire bodyguards. I had to wear a bulletproof vest, and we didn't have social media. If we had, I think I'd be dead. But anyway, it was a long slog. We finally prevailed on some of the corporate sponsors, and the men of color, the very few, with the exception of Tiger Woods, did come out publicly for us. Woods would not do it. I was told by the Nike Corporation that they had been willing to run a commercial in favor of the club opening, and Woods vetoed it. And his mother actually called me and confirmed that. She was very nonplussed by that. But anyway, that's what happened. They did eventually open. They have, I think, 3 women now. And they were racist as well as sexist. For many years, the rules were that the caddies were all black, the players were all white. And the men of color who eventually did play there, for example, Lee Elder, I think it was him, he wouldn't go in their locker room. He always changed in the parking lot because he didn't want to give them that credibility. And so that was it. But it did call attention to institutionalized sexism that people don't think about, but deals are made at that kind of venue. IBM was bought and sold on that golf course, and when women are left out of that, it's just an off-campus business venue, and it's not right. So an interesting chapter, let's say.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And it is, I mean, it's about access, right? It's about access to representation and to power and decision making. And thank you for that. Kristina, did you have anything, or you want to?
I think it's time for us to open it up to some questions from the audience.
That would be good.
Yeah, I think you can just unmute yourself and ask away.
And at least wave, so we kind of can go. Bob, I saw your hand first. Between Kristina and George and I will try to be fair. And if
I've always got a question.
We ask you to try to be fair too, and keep it, you know.
Be concise, yeah, okay. Not live up to my reputation for never using one word when 10 would do. Anyway, back to the certainty that more women in elective offices would change policy dramatically in the direction that many of us would wish. What advice would you have for those of us of the more challenged sex who would like to be of help to women candidates? Things that we should do and shouldn't do, if you have any at the top of your mind. I mean, I'm thinking that sometimes you can help people to death and help them in ways that they don't really want to be helped. And anyway, that's the question.
Thank you for the question, and thanks to all the guys that are on with us. I really appreciate that. The first thing you do is ask them what they need, but be prepared, because I think Kristina would certainly, well, and AnJanette as well, every level, one of the first things they're going to tell you is money. So give money if you can. Give expertise if you have it. Offer it. Just say, you know, I'm an expert on X, Y, and Z, or I have experience with. Even if you're not an expert, let's say you're a guy that's had a couple of kids at home and you've had a 2-earner family, and you can talk about that. That helps a lot, to talk about your own experience. Traditionally, and even now, and we are certainly seeing it with Black Lives Matter, one of the main engines of social change, whether it goes back to suffrage, slavery, whatever, is street action. So if there is some kind of rally, some kind of march, any kind of public event that you can show some support for, your body is very important to show up. Because, I mean, showing up is everything, because otherwise the opposition will say, well, people don't care about this. You know, nobody talks about it. So your question is very good, and I'm not religious, but I think there's something biblical about giving as per your talents, and that's a good thing to remember.
I would add, after the pandemic, you can offer to watch the children of the candidate, because childcare is not taxed, it's not deductible, it's not an allowed expense for campaigning, which is really challenging.
I didn't know that. Oh my God.
No, no.
I'll
So
watch your kids sometime.
after the pandemic, thank you. I'll take you up on that.
There is an organization called Vote Mama that is specifically focused on that kind of issues, about like making it more possible for mothers to run for office, because it matters. We need that lived experience informing our decisions.
Yeah, one more little statistic that I left out a while ago. Mothers overall, the pay gap, they're at 69 cents. So motherhood is a punishment pay.
In other ways too sometimes. Are there any other, I love being a mother, don't get me wrong. Any questions, any other questions? So I think, does Mark Goodman have a question? Oh, here we go, Virginia.
Hi, another form of care that often falls on women's shoulders in the family is elder care, care for parents. I took 5 years out of my quote unquote career to care for my parents. And that has impacted, you know, my savings and my ability to own a home. I had to sell my house and so forth to move home. So is there anything in our platform that campaigns for compensation?
I have a small section on elder care in the book, but the bad news is not much is being done. You're absolutely right. It falls on women very disproportionately. For one thing, we live longer than men, and so it makes for more older women and semi-older women taking care of their own mothers. There are no bills in Congress right now, and none at the state level that I know of, to help any family with elder care. Now, if you're poor, sometimes you can get subsidies for facilities, sometimes, but those are very meager and some of the facilities aren't very good. It is a terrible problem. If I had the answer, I could rule the world. I don't. But I think it's something that we all need to attend to and be particularly attuned to the fact that it does fall disproportionately on women, and it hurts you all through your career, and it even affects the health of, you know, a woman in her 50s taking care of an 80-year-old or 90-year-old, and there's a lot of lifting and that sort of thing. It can affect your health, so it's an important issue.
Mark,
Go ahead.
Mark Goodman,
He might be.
you are
adjusting.
on mute, please.
Let's see. I think maybe he might be adjusting his camera. Do we have any other questions for Dr. Burk? Well, I really recommend you getting this book. It was enlightening. As a first-time candidate, I really do wish that that I had read this book before I started campaigning, because at the end of each chapter, you know, you list questions for candidates about the issues, and I think it's you know, as a candidate, I'm going to do my best. There you go. I'm going to do my best to answer these questions for myself and talk about the issues, you know, in upcoming forums and debates, which, you know, will probably start soon. But, you know, as a voter as well, it is incumbent upon me and all of you here to ask these questions as well. Make sure that the candidates that will represent you are up on the issues, particularly, you know, around women's issues, and hold their feet to the fire, hold them accountable. This is what this book is really good for. It gives you the knowledge and the stats and the facts to take to those candidates and push them a little. We need to be pushed, and that's how we learn, and that's how we make a better community. So thank you, Dr. Burk.
Thank you. I think that's really important. And what I tried to do with the questions is make them specific.
Mm-hmm.
Do you support X, Y, and Z? How would you vote, or how did you vote?
Mm-hmm.
Or something else. And it's not just, are you in favor of childcare? It's
No.
like, what do you think about the so-and-so act? Or what is your plan for pre-kindergarten specifically?
Yeah.
And those are the kinds of things that I think candidates appreciate, in a way, knowing what they don't know. And if the constituents start asking, I think it's a motivator. It sounds from you as if it is.
It definitely was for me as well. And the parts that I paused, like there's a list of questions, and I really do recommend everyone go to taosvotesblue.com and you get your signed copy for $12. But the questions for candidates, it's an important tool. And it's important for candidates to think about too, because where I paused, Dr. Burk, was you didn't just ask, would you support this? Did you vote for it? Would you vote for it? Those things can be easy to answer, right? Like, sure, of course, I'm all for that. We're all for that. But the questions that you pepper in consistently are, so how would you achieve that? You know, so it really.
How are you actually going to make that happen?
What would you do to make that kind of progress that we're looking for? And those are things that we all need to be thinking about. We all need to be asking each other, especially now when we need so much progress to be made. So I highly recommend it. Also, the other way that the book is a tool is it includes both major parties' platforms in the back, so you can compare. She holds the party platforms to the fire.
This is really important because I think most people don't realize how extreme that the Republican platform is, and it's pretty anti-woman. And what I did on those platforms, I just took it word for word out of the platform.
Yeah.
I didn't proselytize it all. I said, here are the words in the platform. You just read it for yourself and make your own conclusions. Now, the platforms will be tweaked a little bit in the upcoming conventions, but not much. They pretty well stay the same 4 years to 4 years, and we'll see with Trump what more draconian stuff he's able to get in. But yeah, it's very enlightening to see the contrast. I even tell you the page of the platform it's on.
Wow, it's a great tool. And I think I see another audience question. Christy?
It's not so much a question as a statement. I want to thank you, Dr. Burk, because one of the things that I've struggled with in trying to engage a number of my friends and family members, when I try to engage them in a political discussion, for many of the people in my life, it's a one-issue question. Are you pro-life or are you pro-choice? And if their candidate, or when they're looking at candidates, if they're pro-choice, they will not vote for them. And I struggle with this, and because, and I just said to a friend that I felt the most comfortable with, I was like, okay, you're pro-life, but pro-life cannot just be inside the womb. What about children who are born? And I worked with kids with physical disabilities for 20 years. What about children? You know, where's the funding for special ed? Where's this funding for early intervention? Where's funding for mental health? Where's funding for our veterans who are coming back with all 4 extremities blown off, or who are suffering from PTSD? I was like, to me, that's pro-life. If you say you're pro-life, it has to be over the lifespan. And what I have found in your book is that there, you know, all the statistics, the laws, and it's like, okay, how is this? So I'm waiting to talk to someone, because it's like, okay, how does your candidate say he's pro-life when he's voting against this, or he voted against this, or he voted against that? So thank you very much, because you've given me a tool, and I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, you're pro-life. How many child care bills, how many pre-kindergarten bills have you voted for or sponsored, or how many candidates who like that would you go to the polls for? So thank you.
What kind of programs have you sponsored to alleviate poverty? You know?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you volunteer at a senior center, or you know, what do you do besides vote against women's reproductive rights?
I have a question. I had a hard time getting into the meeting, and I'm not turning on my light because I'm currently in my bathrobe because I got really wet in the rain. I have, this is Mary Lane, Leslie.
That's what I thought. I thought it was you, Mary Lane.
Hi, Rebecca. Hi, all of you. So Dr. Burke, here is a situation that I've had lately with a couple that we are very close friends with. And I'm so passionate about politics. And I was a Republican, I'm ashamed to say, for too long a time. But I saw the light. And these people are extreme independents. And they are mad that they have to even register as as a Democrat, even just for the purposes of voting in the primary. Although AnJanette, they were in your district, and I did get them to register for about 15 minutes, long enough to vote for you. Yeah, but so what do you say to people that are so independent? Should I just show them the two platforms of the parties and say, we are still a two-party system. Which one of these platforms can you support?
I think that's an excellent idea. It's an excellent idea. And there's an old saying, you ought not be so open-minded that your brains fall out. And if they can't see that if they want any kind of change, independent or not, they ought to be able to pick an issue that they care passionately about, look at those platforms, look at the records of the people and the platforms of the individual candidates, and okay, fine, be an independent, but you got to make a choice if you want to make change.
Right, right. And I haven't always been 100% happy with the Democrats. None of us have been, but yeah, where else do you make a difference than within the group to try to bring change about, like you've done? And I can't wait to buy your book. I think it's going to be a huge resource, and thank you so much.
Well, I have a very short little anecdote to tell you, and it's about being conflicted about what you stand for or the candidates or whatever. Some of you may be old enough to remember when Anita Hill testified before the Judiciary Committee in the Clarence Thomas hearings for the Supreme Court. Probably most of you are too young to remember that, but I was in the room the whole time. And I, along with other leaders of women's groups, begged Joe Biden to let two other women who were waiting in the wings to testify, and he would not do it.
Why?
Because Thomas was going to be the first African American on the court. I'm guessing. I mean, he didn't say this overtly, and they just felt like they had to do it. But Anita Hill was the collateral damage, and wasn't she also a minority person? I mean, he said he was getting lynched. Well, what about her? But anyway, I was so mad at Biden. I really didn't even want to talk to him for a couple of years. But then comes the Violence Against Women Act. And there was a lot of opposition in Congress to that act on both sides of the aisle. And Biden would meet with us regularly, strategize, we'd go see other senators. What we'd get would be a staffer or maybe even just an intern. They just didn't want to talk about it. Biden would sit down and go through, and we'd tweak the bills and so forth. And he almost single-handedly got that bill through the Senate. And I say that because people can change. They can do some good stuff and some bad stuff, but you can't just write somebody off for life if they do one thing that is bad. And what he did to Hill was bad. But in my view, he redeemed himself. And I've been getting a lot of questions about Biden, so I just wanted to sort of throw that in there. And
Thank you.
Compared to the alternative.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
no alternative.
I think we have maybe two more questions. Mark Goodman, did you, and then Rebecca. Mark, did you have a question?
Your sound's off, Mark.
Mark, it's in the lower left of the screen, the unmute button.
I think you're unmuted now. Did you have a question?
I did not.
Okay. Okay. our misunderstanding then. Rebecca, go.
Yeah, so it's interesting she brought up the Joe Biden issue because, and I'll just share with George, because yes, I have been making calls for Biden now, like all the other people who say yes. There is no comparison between Trump and Biden, of course, but I'm another woman who is so disappointed every time we can't even get a vice president as a woman. I'm glad that Biden has committed to selecting a running mate who is a woman, but I was interested in your input on that. And I'm also vexed that when the Democrats give us surveys, they don't ask us about other cabinet positions. So for example, when they say, well, Kamala Harris or Elizabeth Warren or da-da-da-da, and I want to say, well, now Kamala Harris should be considered for Attorney General, maybe Susan Rice or Elizabeth Warren for Vice President, but I was interested in your input in that, and I've been happy that Biden's been at least listening to these women.
Well, my first input is they should be talking about it. And I think once the nominations are secured, maybe they will. It has happened before when people have not only run on a president, vice president ticket, but they have talked about who they are going to appoint to the cabinet or who they would consider for the cabinet. I think it's a great idea. I think it's something that wouldn't hurt to write to the candidate about. The staff, believe it or not, they read the mail that comes in. Maybe the candidate never personally sees your note, but the candidate sees a tally of what came in about what issue, and in the case of the House, if you were in their district. The Senate. And yeah, and so I would encourage that. I think they'd be smart to do it. Right now, it seems to me, just watching the tennis match, so to speak, that Kamala Harris and Tammy Duckworth, are probably the two front runners. But I would be surprised if we all got surprised.
What do you think of Susan Rice as a vice presidential candidate?
Yeah, she would be good. I think Harris would be one ass kicker as Attorney General. I mean, I'd really like to see that.
I think so.
I mean, and couldn't Susan Rice be great, as a Secretary of State?
Yes, she would. She's so smart. She's so calmly competent. Which I think is just terrific, but we'll see. I'm glad he's committed to a woman. I am not as strong on Stacey Abrams simply because I think people are going to be saying, okay, Biden may not run for a second term due to his age. Who can step in as president? She has fewer credentials than some of the others. That's my only concern about her. And of course, there are about 6 or 8 others in it that I have looked at real closely.
Right, including our beloved governor.
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well enough. We need her.
If folks want to, sorry to jump in there, but if folks, like, we're a couple minutes after, and at least I like to keep these as close to an hour as possible. If folks want to, like Rebecca, help volunteer, because we can't take anything for granted this year in 2020, and we also need a big blue turnout in New Mexico to make up for other parts of our state and to send the kind of messages we need to send beyond here. So please, if you want to volunteer, there's going to be a lot of opportunities, and you can email taosvotesblue@gmail.com and go to taosvotesblue.com to get Dr. Burk's book. And become a better informed candidate, questioner of candidates, family member, having conversations. And also, there are other new things on our store that you'll see there, not just the book. This year, I'm happy to say we have new t-shirts, not just fresh logo, but in women's sizes. So for the first time, we have women's sizes available, and talk about equity. That's what we've been fighting for, right, George? Right. We also, one last note, we have a variety, they're going fast, we don't have many, but we have a variety of political, like Democratic masks. And here in Taos County, we're seeing our own surge right now. So please, everybody, be careful out there, be safe, stay home as much as you can. And thank you so much for giving us your time tonight. Kristina, thanks for your help. George, thanks for your help. And Dr. Martha Burk, thank you so much for everything you're doing.
Well, it has been a privilege, and thanks to the audience for being here, for listening and asking some very important questions.
Thank you, everybody. Be safe.
Thank you.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.